So I'm always humbled and honoured when anyone comes to listen to me present. So big thanks to OMSI and big thank you to everybody out there for coming and showing such an interest in breathing. I really didn't know what to expect. I thought there could be 2 people, but it was it's nice to see so many people. So thank you. So a little bit about myself. I know I did the introduction, but it's really like my journey to this point and why I'm so interested in breath work and the science of breathing. My career started off in the Premier League, in professional sport, and by sense, professional sport is very traditional, and it's still very traditional to this day. And by that, we mean we'll go in the field and we'll train, we'll go in the gym and we'll train, kind of like the muscles, and we'll sort of get people breathing a bit, and then we'll protein shake them, chuck them in an ice bath, and we'll do like the same for the rest of the year. When I moved to the US, I was given the opportunity by the brand I was working for to really go and explore human performance. And this inflection point came for me when I realized pretty quickly that to really help athletes I was working with, it wasn't necessarily about what we did in the gym or what we did in the field or how many protein shakes they took. It was about the human side of it, and it was about how they moved and how they thought, what sense of community they had, how they nourished themselves, and a big one was how they breathed. So around 8 years ago, I met a guy called Patrick McKeown, and if you're interested in reading, he has some good books that I'd direct you to. And Patrick started to give me this whole knowledge of breathing, this binder about this big. And I was very skeptical, because when he was speaking about the benefits and some of these outcomes of breathing, we're talking about things about aerobic capacity, delaying fatigue, improving sleep, accelerating recovery, all things as performance specialists that we work really hard to do. And he said, well, basically, if you get someone to breathe correctly, then they'll have an increase in their health, increase in their wellness, and an increase in their performance. So it was really from that point where I continued to research, continued to apply the science of breathing with the people I work with. And this journey has really led me to this point here where the information I present to you would be evidence-based, so based on science, some of it based on my experience when we get into some of the programming, but it's really to hopefully give you the knowledge to restore a breathing pattern that you had when you were born. So I'm going to ask you all to take a big deep breath. Okay, we've got a lot of work to do. So when we think about breathing and we say to people, take a deep breath, we've forgotten how to take a deep breath. It's often quite noisy, I could hear it. It's often quite shallow, I could see it. And it's quite forceful. These things are not what we would class a deep breath, they're more a big breath. And we'll get into some of the science of why it's so important, why we can breathe deeply and what the benefits are to you. Also, when we think about what we're going to walk away with, hopefully I'll teach how to breathe properly and also make you care about breathing and showing up. I think you've probably got an understanding of why it's important. So when we think about why we breathe, it's pretty obvious. It's the first thing we do when we enter the world, and it's the last thing we do when we leave this world. We do it up to 20,000 times per day, sometimes more, and it's a subconscious pattern. We don't really think about our breathing pattern. What we're trying to do fundamentally is deliver oxygen to the cells and the tissue, and the brain is pretty hungry for oxygen, and it's really to survive. It's keeping us alive. I believe that we can go beyond this and use our breath work to help us thrive and really start to breathe in a way that becomes functional for a moment in time that can serve you better, and it can help you think better and move better, perform better, and show up better for yourself. So we'll explore some of that. So it's really important that we consider how we breathe in different situations in order to maximize that benefit. So When we talk about breathing, we really will think about 3 different dimensions. You can see a dimension as an area of breathing that would have a focus, but they're not exclusive from each other. There is an overlap. As you see with like a Venn diagram, there is overlap. So the first area is the biomechanics. The biomechanics of breathing is really focused on our muscles that we use to breathe. We have primary muscle, which is our diaphragm, which you saw a picture, so I hope you got that right because there was a big clue there. And some of the intercostal muscles. And really that's the muscle that's being used, hopefully now as you sat there at rest, low intensity activity, at sleep, this is the muscle that's being used. We have some accessory muscles. They're up in the chest, some of the extensors in the back, and up in the neck. These help basically pull up the cavity in order to drive more air in when we need it, when we're exercising or when things are a bit more stressful. So the biomechanics is something we'll explore. The psychophysiological side, you can see that more as your mind-body connection. It's very much related to our nervous system or autonomic nervous system. Think about this as how you think dictates how you breathe, or how you breathe dictates how you think. And this is really starting to move you from, am I stressed or am I focused? Am I calm or am I agitated? And somebody's breathing pattern can give you a very good insight into this. But when you start to understand your breathing, you can control your physiology with your breathing. And then the final element is what we call the biochemistry. And we spoke about oxygen. Key players here are oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitric oxide. And the name of the game here is delivering oxygen efficiently to the cells in the tissue. So one little caveat is when we think about male and females, we do breathe in a slightly different way. One is a mechanical sense when usually females have a smaller thoracic cavity, which means that they can actually draw in less air. Critically for females is the menstrual cycle and the role it plays on the breathing pattern. During the luteal phase, after ovulation, progesterone peaks, and what happens is that a female becomes more sensitive to carbon dioxide. We'll get into what that means, but during these times, a high sensitivity to CO2 can drive a more dysfunctional breathing pattern. Fast, noisy, shallow, and those things drive us to poor mechanics and how we move, more stressful mindset, and less oxygen being delivered to cells and tissue. So, as a female navigates the monthly cycle, having strong foundation of breathing patterns can help mitigate some of these situations where you might feel breathless or more stressed. So let's dive into the biochemical domain. So really the name of the game here is, can we deliver oxygen to our cells and tissue? We know for survival it's critical, but can we maximize that process? And here it all comes down to our relationship with carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide, known as sometimes the waste gas, is not the waste gas. It plays a critical role in the diffusion of oxygen to your cells and tissue. So we have a normal response to CO2, the buildup of CO2 in the blood, and some people have an abnormal response. So the freediver has a very high ceiling or a very high tolerance to CO2. He is not sensitive to CO2. It's actually the buildup of CO2 that triggers your response or need to breathe, not the need for oxygen. You have enough oxygen in your body right now to last at least 3 or 4 minutes. It's this buildup of carbon dioxide. So if you can visualize this ceiling, and if this ceiling is low, you have a high sensitivity to CO2. Once you hit your ceiling, usually through stress, then you want to get rid of carbon dioxide, and that becomes hyperventilation, breathing with the mouth a little bit faster, and we come back to that word dysfunctional, and that impacts your physiology, it impacts your mindset in a negative manner. One of the other chemicals we talk about here is nitric oxide or paranasal nitric oxide. So when we breathe with the nose, nitric oxide builds up, and then we can breathe it into our upper and lower airways. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so you can really think about blood vessels open. When the blood vessels are open, more blood gets delivered, which is a good thing. So when we start thinking about the delivery of more oxygen to cells and tissue, it's a really, really important benefit when it comes to this domain. You obviously can see some of the outcomes here to being more efficient breather, but really what we want to focus on is, can you reduce your sensitivity to CO2? So can you raise your ceiling? Can you start to produce more nasal nitric oxide, which is going to help with dilation, because ultimately you want more oxygen to cells and tissue. When we dig into the science a little bit, we see this oxyhemoglobin curve, and this was, we're coming up to 120 years. So Christian Bohr, this is called the Bohr effect, found that this relationship with carbon dioxide and oxygen. So we have like a normal response, which we spoke about here. And a normal response is we have the x-axis, which is our partial pressure of oxygen. And you can see that as the amount of oxygen that's dissolved. And then we have our y-axis moving upwards there, which is really how loaded the hemoglobin, so the hemoglobin is a protein, how loaded that is with oxygen. So we should have this normal response where we get to our ceiling, we maybe need to off gas a little bit, and then once we sort of regulate ourselves, then we sort of breathe in a normal pattern. Unfortunately, what we're finding with many individuals is this shift to the left. So if you hyperventilate, so you overbreathe, you off-gas too much CO2, you shift the curve to the left. If you shift the curve to the left, you cannot diffuse as much oxygen into the cells and the tissue. So think about that for a biochemical outcome. If I'm hyperventilating, or if I'm using my mouth too much to breathe, this curve shifting, and what happens, you have this increased affinity. So basically the oxygen binds to the hemoglobin and won't give itself up. And this is very, very common in people. This happens, and then you become maybe a bit more alkalized in your blood. And this is a very common outcome. And sometimes this type of breathing can lead to wanting to try and change your blood pH and craving certain foods, and it can have this knock-on effect to your physiology. If we go the other way, and we start to think about things like breath holds, or maybe slowing down the breathing, or using the nose to breathe a little bit more, we shift the curve the other way. And it has the opposite effect. We can become a bit more acidic, we can increase muscle temperature, but ultimately we're going to help diffuse and deliver more oxygen to our cells and tissue. So the name of the game here is to have this normal level, this normal ceiling, and have the ability when required to move either way, not to be stuck to the left side of the curve. The left side of the curve lowers the ceiling, and it leads to a number of dysfunctions and poor outcomes. So the biomechanics of breathing, and this really is focused around movement efficiency and thinking about the muscles that we used. So we touched a little bit upon the diaphragm and its importance, and really thinking about, well, why is that so important to how we move? Your diaphragm is one of your core stabilizers. So when people talk about the core, and maybe you're quite familiar to that, it's like, okay, I understand that this is an important part of my movement system. The diaphragm is a core muscle, along with multifidus, internal obliques, transverse abdominis. The diaphragm is in there. No amount of sit-ups or planks will work this muscle. This muscle works when you breathe, and when you breathe deeply and correctly. So if you suffer from back pain, if you suffer from neck pain, there's a very good chance that your core is underactive and that you're not working this muscle. As a visualization for you, if you think about a dome shape and where we sit that diaphragm, it attaches, and we'll show you a little bit about where it attaches. It really attaches on the spine and the rib cage. So it's deep in there. You're not going to be able to go to a massage parlour and say, can you just give my diaphragm a quick massage? That's not going to happen. You can stretch your diaphragm through breathing and also activate it. So if you imagine this dome shape here, every time I breathe in, it flattens, and every time I breathe out, it moves back into its resting position. So if I can breathe deeply, I can activate and work my diaphragm. If I'm breathing in a shallow manner, there's not much movement. And you know, muscles like to work their range. They like to go through their range of motion. They like to have a concentric and an eccentric action. And if you're not breathing deeply, you're not hitting this muscle correctly. When we think about movement, which is very, very important, and breathing, the two are very, very highly correlated. So if you take the example where somebody can't really activate their diaphragm, they breathe quite shallow, they're quite dysfunctional in their breathing pattern, it's going to have this chain reaction, and it can start to lead to dysfunction. So what starts to happen is, okay, maybe many of us spend too much time on phones, traveling, maybe in cars, at desks. We start to change the way that we move. So all of a sudden my chest and my neck is really, really tight. My back extensors are tight. And we know that these are our accessory muscles. These shouldn't be doing the heavy lift. So now when I try and breathe, I'm all up in my shoulders and chest. I can't physically get into my diaphragm. All of a sudden, this is changing the way I walk. This is changing the way that I perform. And ultimately, poor movement leads to increased cortisol. It leads to decreased performance. And it can lead to injury risk. And it may just present itself as a headache or neck ache or lower back pain. But this chain reaction is occurring where movement efficiency and breathing efficiency are well correlated. We find it in the research that people who move well tend to breathe well, and people who breathe well tend to move well. One study looked at something called a functional movement screening. It's a number of tests, 7 different tests, perform things like an inline lunge, a squat, and they're really scoring that system to say, do you move well or do you move poorly? And they found that the dysfunctional breathers scored lower on the test. So then we move into the psychophysiological domain. This always gets the most interest because this is really where we think about our resiliency to stress and how we manage stress and how we can navigate stress. So you can really start to see this domain as it's very connected to my nervous system, my autonomic nervous system. It's regulated by itself, but I can have some control over this. There's certain responses in the body that happen automatically, and when we get stressed, certain things happen. When we get stressed, we move into what we call that fight or flight, and we'll go deeper into this, but it's really an area of stress. When we're stressed, things change physiologically. We will increase our heart rate. We will release cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And what happens to the breathing? It will become faster. Maybe it becomes more shallow, and maybe it becomes with the use of the mouth. So your breathing is highly correlated to this domain. When we think about how do we know what happens in terms of breathing and what's the link to heart rate variability, which is a proxy into our nervous system, we can do things called biofeedback. We can hook people up to sensors. We can look at something called heart rate variability. And we can start to look at the beat-to-beat interval and see if it's getting shorter or longer. If we have high heart rate variability, it's a sign that there's more parasympathetic drive. We're more in a rest and digest. If there's less variability, then it's a bit more stressful, and we're in that fight or flight response. So when you do slow, deep breathing exercises, slowing down the heart rate, triggering the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, all the way from the brain down into the stomach, you can start to elicit more of a parasympathetic tone, more rest and digest. I promise we'll take you there and give you that experience. So let's dive a little bit more into this nervous system. So when we think about the nervous system, this is something that we call the polyvagal theory. And the polyvagal theory is when we start to think about, okay, we've got this red zone, which we can call our danger zone. It's our stressed zone. I'm not saying it's good or bad, because it can be good if you're trying to run away from something, but it can be bad if you're trying to go to sleep. So this zone is where you're mobilizing and using resources. We said, like, there's a certain release of chemicals, certain things are going on, your body is mobilized, it is getting ready to go. That physiological response, increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate, release of all those neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, epinephrine, that will happen regardless of whether it's physical or mental, perceived or real. So if I get you to all think about something that's really stressing you on your mind right now, I'm sorry, I'll take you here. But it could be financial, it could be a relationship, it could be something that's not even happened. Your body doesn't recognize whether it's real or not real, mental or physical. You drive that change in your physiology. Then we take the green state, so we can call this zoned out. There's kind of like a hierarchy here of you kind of get mobilized and you try and fight the threat. Okay, I can't really win there, so then I'll try and flee and get away from the threat. And then if that doesn't work, then you shut yourself down and you become zoned out or immobilized. And this is very much a fear response where the body will shut you down. I'll give a very good example of how it happens in the human world. If you take a baby that cries and you allow the baby to cry, they are in a sympathetic drive. They're in that red zone. You're allowing them to cry and they'll cry. If you leave them, the baby stops, right? Eventually the baby stops because they will regulate themselves to shut themselves down. They can't keep burning through resources. They have to shut themselves down. This blue zone, this is our ventral vagal side, so it's our front side. This is something we had to adapt as mammals. In order to survive, we needed community. We were not the apex predator. A long time ago, we were trying to figure things out, live in a cave and survive. We were not the apex predator, which meant we needed each other. We needed relationships in order to survive. And through this ventral side, we start to be able to socialize, become intimate, understand how we feel. And listen, the face cannot lie. And when you look at somebody's face, and I think there's a term called RBF, when you look at somebody's face, you can see stress in somebody's face. They cannot hide it. You do not have control in the muscles of your face when you are stressed. So it's a telltale sign that somebody is stressed. This ventral side, if somebody's like this, they're trying to protect themselves. They see a threat. If somebody's open and social and calm, that ventral side is triggered. So think about these states, and we'll talk about regulation of state and how you can move through. You can self-regulate, which we're going to teach you, or you can co-regulate. So if we take the example of the baby's in the red, the baby's crying, you go and attend the baby and you hold the baby, that's co-regulation. You're making the child feel safe and you're regulating their physiology back into an area where they become social and calm. So when it comes to these states, we can think about hybrid states where things meet one another, but really what it is if I'm stressed and I know I'm mobilized, do I have the skill or the intent to push myself in a certain direction? Or am I driven by my own physiology just to shut down? Do I just freeze? Or do I have the ability to get back to that blue zone? We can also think about, do you have the ability to really drive yourself into this zone where you don't want to perform at all? You want to just relax and be social and be calm. So you really want to drive yourself across. There's also times when we might want to drive ourselves into recovery because we do want to shut down. This is probably sleep. It's very difficult to sleep when you're stressed. The biggest disruptor to sleep is stress. And you can't fall asleep if you're oh my gosh, was that a noise? Is something going on there? What's going on there? Because your nervous system is on alert. There's also times when we feel shut down and we feel immobilized. I call this crocodile syndrome. A crocodile does not have a ventral vagal. It has a dorsal vagal and a sympathetic drive. They do two things: sit in the water and do nothing, dorsal vagal, or they attack and kill something, sympathetic drive. Do not be a crocodile. There's many, many crocodiles amongst us who bounce between these two states. They do not have the resiliency to live in a social state because they are so stressed, chronically stressed. So when we think about living in states, we see this as a very, very common outcome. If you think about where people might live on this triangle, they can live very much in the red zone, and then they get in the green zone because their physiology dictates, and then they have to get themselves up again. Like, oh, I've got to do that thing, I've got to get out of bed, I've got to go to work, I've got to do that. We want you to live most of your life in the blue zone with control and have the ability to go where you want, which we will teach you and get you there.
What does D stand for in the DVC?
Dorsal. So that's your dorsal vagal complex. So VVC is ventral, front side. D is dorsal. Okay, so this is assessment time. I would love a volunteer to come and help me out. Anyone? I can't really see, actually. Okay, come down. Thank you. Right, bring out the water tank. Okay, so you can all join in with this, and I'd like you to all join in, because you can do it seated, but it sometimes helps when we've got somebody here. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
What's your name?
Dana.
Dana, Michael. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming up. So, Dana is going to do 3 tests. You can do them there. The first one is what we call a breath hold test. And we're going to basically see where that ceiling is. Is the ceiling normal, high, or low? And we'll explain the results when we get to the end. Okay, so we can all follow along. So you're going to take a normal breath in, a normal breath out, and just continue that pattern. And the only condition I want you to do is breathe with your nose. So just settle in for me, okay? So she's breathing in, she's breathing out, maybe a little pause, and she's just going to follow that pattern. Please follow along here. When she is comfortable, on an exhale, I'll ask you to pinch your nose, and I'm going to start my timer. And the point when you feel you need to breathe, release and breathe in for me. Okay?
But on the exhale.
Exhale, pinch, wait, release. When you release, release at the point where you feel the first desire to breathe. Okay, so it's not a maximal test. This is like, oh, something maybe in my tummy, something in my neck, that first desire to breathe. When you restart your breathing, I just want you to go nice and controlled in and out. So the breath on the back end is as calm as the breath on the front end. Okay. Happy? Mm-hmm. Okay. Continue to breathe for me then. So breathe in, breathe out. Over to you. When you're ready, you exhale, pinch the nose, and I'll start the timer. And off we go. So 2, 3, and when you're ready, you just release and breathe in. That's 6, 7, 8, 9. No right or wrong. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I'll keep going. 17, just for the audience. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Anyone going for the world record? Okay, so we'll stop around 30. So about 16 seconds?
Yeah, and that was when I just felt like I should, but I could have gone longer, but
okay.
I didn't.
Perfect.
Okay.
So the response was, I felt like I needed to, I could have gone longer, and it looked pretty good. Like when I looked at it, it wasn't laboured on the back end, so some people will go, which is a 2 hold along, so it looked pretty good. Okay, So, next little test we're going to do is what we call a high-low test. So, we're going to have you place one hand on your chest and one on your belly, and I just want you to breathe normally. So this is very much more observational. These tests or assessments are in the literature, so they're classed as reliable and valid. So what we're looking for here is an excursion either from the chest or the belly, and you got it. If we see more movement from the belly, it's more diaphragmatic, and if there's more movement from the chest, it's more thoracic. We want more movement from here. Sometimes you can feel it. Sometimes it's like,
this,
okay,
not so much this.
okay, great. And then the last test you can do from the comfort of your chair. Thank you very much for coming up. Round of applause. Here's a little questionnaire for you all. So, very quickly, just go through and tot your score up here. Question number 4 about the breathing with your mouth during sleep. If you've come with a partner that you sleep with, ask them, hey, do I snore or breathe through my mouth? If you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I do or don't, you can also say, do I wake up with a dry mouth? Do I need to go to the bathroom to take a pee? Or do I wake up and I'm coughing? Or do I snore? That's a big sign that that's a frequent. So tot your score up there for me and try and remember your score. Okay. Raise of hands if you scored more than 2 on this survey. Okay. You can lower your hand if you got more than 25 on your breath hold time. Okay, so let me pitch that to you again. If your breath hold time was less than 25 seconds and you scored more than 2 on this test, there's an 89% chance that you're a dysfunctional breather. Okay? So you won't be breaking any world records. So when we look at the test and we look at the literature, you're not alone. This is like something that's so common. There was a recent study that was done with around 2,000 athletes, multi-sport, and 91% of them had some kind of dysfunctional breathing trait. So you're not alone. This tells us that exercise alone does not develop the respiratory system in a way that is functional. You have to work your respiratory system. You have to take control of your breathing and formally start to retrain it. So, where does this all lead us to? So if you are that less than 25 seconds, if you are that more than 2 on the score, if you are that chest breathing, there's a very good chance you're a chronic hyperventilator. Chronic hyperventilation leads to poor movement efficiency, it leads to a stressful state, and it leads to less oxygen to the cells and tissue. You want to move away from this, and the good news is we'll get into the how. So it comes to the practical part of breathing, and like, so what do I do about this? You've told me I don't breathe very well, like I didn't even know that, and I'm sort of coming here like feeling sad. So let's try and help you out a little bit. So the foundation is to restore a normal breathing pattern, and we'll get into this practically what this is. You take 20,000 breaths per day. Let's make as many as you can functional. That's all you need to do. If you think about your breathing, you go to this normal breathing pattern that we'll teach you. Next up is some kind of formal breathing practice. Some daily practice, 5 minutes per day, has been shown in the research to make a significant impact on your physiology and to your stress. So 5 minutes per day. Then we get up the pyramid where we get a bit more technical, and then we're using the techniques. Do you have tools in the toolbox to move you around that stress Venn diagram? If I'm stressed, can I be less stressed? If I need to get up for something, can I activate myself? And we're going to go through all these techniques. You can think about breathing as function and form. We need to restore function. We need to get back to nasal breathing. We need to make sure posture's good. We need to make sure the form's good when we think about, is it deep, is it slow, is it light? Because this all results in this focus part of you. It all dictates how you're going to think and feel. So, first exercise, normal breathing pattern, foundational, and we'll do a few breaths together. So what I'd like you to do is switch to a nasal breathing pattern. That just means breathe in through the nose, breathe out through the nose. And if you can, take a natural pause after the exhale. If this is stressful, go back to however you want to breathe. We're not trying to push ourselves here. We're just trying to retrain our system to breathe. So breathe in, breathe out, take a pause. Breathe in, breathe out, take a pause. I'd like you to think about the tongue being in the roof of the mouth, gently, and feel the difference there in the jaw and opening up the airway. Little trick for you. If you pinch your nose and place your tongue in the roof of the mouth, try and breathe with your mouth. Keep the tongue in the roof, open your mouth, try and breathe. Can't breathe, okay? Okay. So pushing the tongue in the roof of the mouth encourages to nasally breathe, so it opens up that airway to breathe. The next part is the direction of the breath. So breathe towards the back of your throat and down into your back. Do not breathe up into your head. Your nose is not functioning where it goes directly into your brain. It goes towards the back of your head. There's these turbinates. You can almost see them as like sand dunes that work its way towards the back of your throat. So if you want to visualize, take the air in and it works its way to the back and then it comes down. So this is a normal breathing pattern. Nasal, in, out. Pause, tongue position, direction of the breath. We want it to be quiet, we want it to be slow, and we want it to be deep. So that's all I'm asking. Normal breathing pattern, nice and simple. Your first takeaway is anytime I think about my breathing, I go to this. And it might be 1 breath, it might be 5 breaths, it might be 20 breaths. The more you do it, the more neural network you will create, and that subconscious breathing pattern will improve. Okay, so let's get into a daily practice. So this is a great takeaway if you want to just say, okay, I want 5 minutes a day, I'm just going to lie down and breathe. We're going to condition the inhale and the exhale. So we can call this cadence or tempo breathing. Remember right at the start we spoke about slow breathing elicits a parasympathetic rest and digest tone. So this is where we get the vagus nerve going in order to relax and settle, strengthening your heart rate variability. So we'll do 6 breaths together. We're going to inhale for 5, exhale for 5 and pause for 1. It's going to give us around 6 breaths per minute. That's where the research will tell us more vagal tone, more parasympathetic. If this is a challenge, go to 4 seconds, 4, or if that's a challenge, just go in through the nose, out through the nose. So if you're going to work with me, we're going to go in, 4, 3, 2, 1, out, 4, 3, 2, 1, and pause. In, 4, 3, 2, 1, out, 4, 3, 2, 1, pause. Nice and controlled. In, 4, 3, 2, 1, out, 4, 3, 2, 1, pause. Keep that count going in your head. In, and just keep that count going. 3 more breaths. Tongue, direction of the breath. And every time you exhale, you can think about just relaxing the shoulders a little bit. Remember, exhale slows down the heart rate, sink into the breath. Do 1 more breath at your own tempo, and then just check in with how you feel. So you did around 1 minute. You do that 4 more times, that's your 5 minutes, you're done. I guarantee it will change your life. So now we get into more the technical side of breathing, where we're giving you some of the techniques. So this is what we would call more of like a down regulation exercise. So it's the physiological side. So if anyone follows Andrew Huberman, this was probably made famous by Andrew Huberman. If this is a little bit difficult, don't worry. We're going to do a couple of breaths together. So you're in a situation where you're sympathetically triggered. You've recognized that you're stressed and you want to regain a little bit of control. You would take an inhale through the nose and pause, an inhale and pause, and then a long exhale. Nose or mouth is okay, and pause. So let's go together. Inhale, pause, inhale, pause, long exhale. If you go mouth, go small mouth. Do one more. Inhale, pause, inhale, pause, slow exhale, pause. Back to a normal breathing pattern for me. 2 or 3 of these breaths is good enough to get you back into control of your physiology. You can do 5 or 6 or 7. It can become quite difficult to maintain that, especially if you've got that low ceiling. But this is a very good technique in order to regulate nervous system. Okay, the next one is more hyperventilation. So not recommending this one if you've got a very, very low breath hold time. So if your breath hold time was like 5, 6, 7 seconds, we're asking you to hyperventilate. So you know that hyperventilation leads to a sympathetic driver. So if you're a little bit withdrawn, you feel a bit stressed, then you need to think about, how do I get to where I want to get to? You need to know where you are to start with before you get anywhere. So the first step to any of this part of regulation is, how do I feel? Where am I? I feel a bit shut down. I feel a bit detached. Okay, I need to go and get myself up-regulated. So we'll do 10 breaths. This is called a bellows breath. I forget the name in yogic terms, but it is a yogic breathing method. It's in the research and literature, and I've seen up to 100 breaths done like this. I can't do that, it's too much for me, but we'll just try 10. So the key here is that you stay in control and you stay deep. So we'll breathe in, breathe out, but try and stay deep. We can breathe with a little bit more force and breathe with a decent amount of velocity. Don't get shallow, and if you want to use the mouth to exhale, don't use the mouth to inhale. Another big benefit of your nose is it's your first line of defense. It's your natural filter. There are tiny little hairs in there, there's mucus in there, and as you breathe in, it filters out bacteria and pathogens. If you breathe in with your mouth a lot, that's bacteria, that's pathogens going into your respiratory system. So always go for the in through the nose. If you want to use the mouth, that's fine. We'll try and do like a 3 or 4 seconds in, 3 or 4 seconds out, and we're going to be a bit more rapid here. So check in with where you are, hopefully a bit more relaxed. And then once we've checked in, we're going to in, 3, 2, 1, out, 3, 2, 1. In, 3, 2, 1, out, 3, 2, 1. In, 3, 2, 1, out, 3, 2, 1. Good. In, 3, 2, 1, out, 3, 2, 1. Keep going at that tempo for me. 4 or 5 more breaths. If you tapped out, that's fine. No problem. But you might start to sense, hey, I feel a little bit more lightheaded. That can be normal. Might feel a little bit more alert or agitated. That's normal. And now just go back into the normal breathing pattern for me. So good technique if you want to up-regulate the nervous system. If you want to get a little bit more alert, maybe you need to go into a meeting, you need to go and perform. Like this can be a very, very good technique. Again, little caveat. I probably think through some of your assessment, most of you are hyperventilators anyway. So this is probably not the best exercise for you. If it comes back to that pyramid, think normal breathing pattern, number 1. Then I have my daily practice, number 2. And then I have a tool in the toolbox to help move me from a stressful state to a non-stressful state. When we look at causes of stress and impact on your health, a recent survey looked at a group of American adults, and it was 76% of the adults that said they felt that stress was impacting their health. So I think most of us live in a sympathetic driver. So this will enhance or drive that. So think about, okay, maybe I want to strengthen the other side and strengthen more of the parasympathetic. So then it often comes down to like, okay, so what does all this mean? Like we're telling us that we're not breathing correctly, but I'm still alive. And then like what's going on with like how I feel and my physiology. Hopefully with some of those exercises, you felt a difference. You felt a change in state. Maybe you felt a bit more sleepy and relaxed. Maybe you felt a little bit more alert. Maybe you realized, hey, like I breathe with my mouth a lot, or when I switch to nasal breathing, it's really difficult for me. The first step to your breathing journey is this consciousness again. When you enter the world, you're pretty functional in the way that you breathe. Like watch an infant or a child breathe. It's normally with the nose. You see their little belly popping forth, and it is a little bit quicker at that point. It sort of slows down once they get to adulthood. The corruption of adulthood drives us into these dysfunctional patterns. What we eat, environmental, too much sitting down, too much stress. These things are driving us to those states. So hopefully you felt it for yourself. When we start to think and look at the research around some maybe performance outcomes, it's starting to emerge. I have many debates and discussions with my peers in the performance space around breathwork. Many don't believe it's a thing. Many don't believe that it can have a competitive advantage to performance or recovery. And it's just where we are in the whole development of respiratory science and research in this area. I'm a true believer for myself. I'm also, with the people and athletes I work with, I see some big benefits. The athletes I have are golf, so I have a pro golfer. Their desired outcome was more focus and more power. So we work very much on biomechanics and psychophysiological. I have a pro cyclist who actually won his first pro race this weekend. I'm not saying it's all down to breathing, because the guy works hard, but adding this in like helps support his aerobic capacity. Pro soccer players I work with, boxing, rugby. I work with many different CEOs, and they feel the benefits of breathing correctly for their health, their wellness, and their performance. So when we start looking at research, we're starting to see some evidence to suggest that changing breathing patterns or training the respiratory system can have an impact. The first study up there was a group of basketball players, and it was youth basketball players. And all they did, that normal breathing pattern that I was asking you to do, breathe in, breathe out, pause. That's all they did. So they didn't do anything more than just get them to breathe less air. You can over-breathe. It sounds crazy, but you can overeat, you can over-drink, you can over-breathe. Over-breathing is basically hyperventilation. Slowing down, going back to nasal was found in this study to increase their aerobic capacity. The yo-yo test is this horrible test where you run back and forth, and you're running to like a metronome and you keep going until you can't go anymore. So basically they found that they could run further just by restoring normal breathing patterns. The second study was with rugby players. I know it's not that popular here. It's like this egg-shaped ball, and they throw it. So they found that they increased repeated sprintability. So this was with breath holds. So we didn't really cover breath holds, but breath holds are a great way to train the diaphragm, raise the ceiling, and there's also some evidence to suggest that the spleen will contract. Your spleen is your blood bank. So when you hold your breath for a long time, the spleen contracts and releases more red oxygenated blood cells. There's also some evidence to suggest that it increases EPO. EPO was made famous by Lance Armstrong, if people can remember that guy. He would take with him on the tour red blood cells and inject them into him because he wanted more oxygen within his system. He should have just been holding his breath and he would have got the same benefit. So in this study, after a period of 6 weeks, I think it was, or maybe it was 4 weeks, They had one group just run sprints, and the other group would run sprints, but while they were running the sprint, they would hold their breath. So they would breathe in, breathe out, just as Dana did for us on the bush exercise, and they had to hit a certain speed, and if they maintained that speed, they would stop, and then they'd go again after 30 seconds. After the intervention period, they increased their repeated sprint ability by 41%. Like, that was one of the studies where I was like, okay, I need to start taking this seriously. The reason why we think that occurs is when we hold our breath and we looked at that bore curve and we sort of saw what was going on, we become more acidic. It drives us to the right side of the curve. I do a lot of breath holds when I walk. And when you walk and hold your breath, you create the acidity and you increase the ceiling. And it's a very similar response to if you were sprinting. So you're kind of creating the adaptation without necessarily creating the muscle damage, which is a huge benefit in the performance world when we think, okay, I don't really want muscle damage when I'm in season because I'm trying to recover to play the next game. So if I can get a benefit by holding my breath and doing like a sub-maximal sprint or walking, that's a really, really big benefit. Also benefits with runners, where we're seeing this increase of EPO and running economy. I think a bit of this is also to do with movement and biomechanics. We spoke a lot about the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is a muscle, and if you think I'm breathing and it's moving up and down, up and down, up and down, the faster I breathe, the more it works, and there's something called a meta-bore flex. So if you're a runner or a cyclist or anyone who likes to exercise, obviously your legs are getting a ton of blood because the muscle needs the oxygen. So it's sending oxygen to there. The faster you breathe and the harder you breathe, the more demand it places on the diaphragm. At the point you fatigue your diaphragm to the point where it needs oxygen, it will vasoconstrict peripheral tissue. So the legs will basically close, and all the blood comes from the legs into the diaphragm. At that point, that's when you start to feel a bit jelly-legged because it's no longer being fed with oxygen. So I think this study also benefited a lot from the fact that a stronger diaphragm was delaying fatigue. And when we think about running economy, it's also a case of movement efficiency. And we looked at some of the research earlier to say, breathe well, move well. And it's a lot to do with that posture and that core. When the core becomes fatigued, we tend to start seeing changes in the pelvis, leaning forward, shoulders coming forward. So I think there was a big change there in that study as well. And then just the final studies where we're talking about this long exhale. So how long do you need to hold your breath in order to get that splenic contraction? So if your breath hold time was above 25 seconds, I think this is doable. I think it's a good exercise to do. 5 to 10 maximal breath holds per day with a rest interval of about 60 to 90 seconds in between. So you'd breathe in, breathe out, and you would hold your breath. You can do it seated, standing, or walking, but you hold your breath until it's really, really uncomfortable. And when it gets to that point when it's really uncomfortable, you hold it for a little bit longer, and then you breathe in through the nose, and it'll be fast and laboured and pretty crazy sounding, but you stay on the nose and you settle back in. Another reason we want you to inhale through the nose is that buildup of nitric oxide. So using your nose to breathe increases the production of nitric oxide by 7 times more than using your mouth. Humming is 20 times more than just using your nose. So a little tip, if you breathe in, breathe out and hum, you become more parasympathetic because it probably makes your exhale longer and you increase the amount of paranasal nitric oxide. It's also one of the reasons why we think that humming helps with children. You take a child and you hum, it makes you parasympathetic, and then that transfers and we co-regulate. Also, if you look at a lot of ancient chants and you go way back, they do a lot of humming. What was found with the tempo of some of these chants, it was 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So it just goes to show, and I always say, we look at what's being done in like ancient times, or we look to the east, we put it in a lab in the west, and then we call it science. But these things are being done a long time before we were here. So I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath for me. Oh, wait. Okay, so we're going to take a deep breath. When you're ready, off you go. Okay, my job here is done. Thank you for your interest in breathing.